Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Judy Chu, member of the United States Congress, and welcome home. It's been a tough October, no doubt. I want to get a sense from you, walking through the halls of Congress, how did it feel from October 1st to October 17th?
It was so incredibly tense and frustrating. Everybody had their frustrations on the tip of their tongue.
Right.
They shared it with one another, regardless of party.
Interesting.
Though we didn't get to the substance of our frustration.
What's interesting to me is that you've heard the cliche, I'm not a member of any organized political party, I'm a Democrat. You've heard that before. Yet the Democrats were incredibly organized. They were incredibly coherent during this process. I mean, no one jumped ship. It was the Republicans that were fighting internally. Explain that dynamic.
I was so proud of our Democratic caucus. We really hung together. There were some deliberately tough votes, and yes, we were very, very united from beginning to end. On the other hand, the Republicans really showed their fractures, their cracks, and they were fighting with one another quite a bit.
But what about those that would say the Democrats, they wouldn't negotiate with us? You know, we just wanted to talk to the Democrats about Obamacare, about the debt, about the deficit. What about those issues?
Well, first let me say that we were able to negotiate on Obamacare in general because we would have preferred a public option. But some did not. Single
payer, for example.
And many actually were for single payer. Then on these negotiations, we went down $238 million from what the Republicans wanted. They wanted a lower amount for the budget.
I see.
Over $1 trillion. And we accepted their lower amount.
Right.
In fact, when we started the negotiation, Speaker Boehner said that that was acceptable.
What's interesting, though, is that when you look at the final calculation, when you look at the final result, pundits are saying left, right, and center, this was a huge win for the Democratic Party, a huge win for the president. Okay, that's fine, but where do we go from here? We still have to govern. We still have deadlines coming up. I think by December 15th, there needs to be some type of budget framework. There's the debt ceiling, which expires, I believe, is it February 7th?
Yes.
So, you know, do the victory dance if you'd like, but we got to keep going.
Well, let me say that I think that there were no winners in a fight like this. When I saw the suffering of people out there, it just made me sick to think of 800,000 workers furloughed and all the other people that suffered, businesses that were shuttered down because of that. I am proud that the Democrats stood up for the right thing, which was to reopen government, and we were the ones that provided a unanimous vote for that to happen. Yes,
literally.
it
Not
was
a single Democrat voted against.
Completely unanimous, but in my opinion, this never should have happened in the first place.
So where do you go from here, though? I mean, look, one could argue that it'd be to the Democrats' advantage if the Republicans would unify a bit, because then there could be a legitimate discussion. But you're not debating against one party. There's the conservative wing, the moderate wing, so it's not even clear with whom you should negotiate.
It is 3 months from now in which the budget negotiations will start to have that deadline again.
Right.
So we do have a good 3 months in which to have a dialogue. And I would have to think that Republicans would look at the results of the polling in which their numbers went way down and say that we can't afford to have this kind of shutdown again.
But what's so interesting about that polling is that, you know, in the 21st century, and specifically in this decade, a lot of partisans live in an echo chamber. Democrats watch MSNBC, Republicans watch Fox News. I mean, in the run-up to the presidential election, the Fox News crowd, they were convinced that Mitt Romney was going to win. And even today, you know, the Republicans on talk radio, I mean, it wasn't until the very end when Rush Limbaugh said we lost that there was any kind of sense in that Republican echo chamber that the Republicans were suffering.
I hope that there's a grown-up in that bunch that can say, look, we're losing the big races. We're losing the presidency. We're losing the majority in the Senate. Yes, you and your individual congressional districts might be able to survive, but they might lose the whole country, really.
Right. I remember one of your colleagues, whose name I forget, had mentioned during the debate that we won't be disrespected. And that kind of became a mantra that the Republicans weren't even sure what they wanted. They just didn't want to be disrespected. I understand that we can laugh at that, but there is something to it, that it's easy to gloat if you're a Democrat. But again, we need to govern. Are the Democrats willing to, be the bigger boys, I hate to use that cliche, and make this work?
What we want is consistency in a dialogue. And Speaker Boehner actually originally said that he wanted that lower number for the budget, but that he was willing to reopen government. And then he changed his tune midway through. So what we want is consistency from beginning to end in terms of what the parameters are.
I want to shift gears, if I may, and speak with you about the Affordable Care Act. One would have thought that that's what we'd be talking about throughout all of October, because that is when the Affordable Care Act, at least the exchanges, went live. But there was a lot of focus upon the shutdown. We're now past that, and we have 3, 4, 5 weeks to reflect on the rollout. My sense, and tell me if it's yours as well, Congresswoman, is that Covered California, the healthcare exchange here in our state, little bumps, a few bumps along the way, figuring out if your doctor's on a plan, but the rollout has been okay.
Yes.
Healthcare.gov, not so much. Where are we with regard to the healthcare exchanges?
Well, some states are doing so very well. California is in the lead, and some states that you'd never expect, like in Kentucky.
I read that
Yes.
as well. I know, it's crazy. Kentucky has a huge number of signups, especially per capita.
Yeah.
And so I guess the concern of the proponents of the Affordable Care Act is, while the states that are running their own exchanges seem to be getting a handle on their own, healthcare.gov, which is the exchange for 36 states, it's still really facing obstacles and hurdles. And some are concerned that unless it gets remedied quickly, that people will just sour to it entirely, and it will cause a death spiral.
Well, I do believe this is the #1 priority for the administration, making sure that it works, and they increase the volume and capacity of the network immediately for that website. They are working very, very hard to make sure that it runs smoothly and that as many people get signed up as possible. This is something that would be so beneficial to so many people, and we all want it to work perfectly.
Do you have a sense as to what exactly the Republicans wanted in terms of a fix on the Affordable Care Act? I was having difficulty finding what they were looking for, other than a complete repeal. Did you?
I actually thought that they wanted that complete repeal.
A complete repeal.
Yeah, I don't think that they wanted anything in between. And they then suggested different types of things that they thought would ultimately lead to a defunding of Obamacare.
They were looking at the tax, the tax on medical tax, right?
Device tax, yes.
And I'm wondering, though, I mean, even Democrats would say some fixes need to be made to the Affordable Care Act. It's a huge, whatever number-page document. Is there now the will to at least make those fixes so that the law can go forward in a bipartisan fashion?
Oh, I think there have to be a lot of fixes to the program. For instance, this verification of the income, of course, that's a very, very good thing. Ultimately, there will be glitches, just as there were for Medicare and just as there were for Social Security. You know, Social Security had quite a few amendments before it became the system that it is today. And now nobody wants anybody to mess with their Social Security or Medicare.
Her name is Judy Chu. She's a member of the US Congress. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
In what year did the United States experience its first federal government shutdown?
Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Jeff Prang. He's a council member in West Hollywood, also a candidate for Los Angeles County Assessor. And I want to speak with you, sir, about the Assessor's office. Many of our viewers know that the current assessor, under criminal indictment, he has taken a leave of absence. You came in to try to help clean up the mess in the wake of that scenario. Where does the office stand?
The office is actually in really good shape today. We've had a reform administration in place for about a year and a half. We've been able to implement all types of new policies and programs that addressed both the issues associated with that scandal, but also some things that are really good for the office in terms of its long-range planning.
And one of the questions surrounding the scandal was whether there should be donations made. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Well, one of the biggest groups that had interest in the assessor's office in the past were a classification of people called tax agents. These are people who lobby the assessor's office. The Board of Supervisors has adopted an ordinance that prohibits them from donating to the assessor's office where there might be a question of conflict. They now have to register with the county just like lobbyists. But the county has also adopted a number of other policies to ensure better checks and balances, to make sure that one employee can't go into the system and make changes without it being checked by a supervisor and a supervisor's supervisor.
And the reason these agents would lobby is they were trying to convince the assessor staff to set property values at lower levels as a way to impact the property tax bill.
Typically, people who own large parcels of property, they're worth a lot of money, they will hire these tax agents to ensure that their taxes are accurate, they're not paying any more than they have to. And they hire tax agents, which are like a lobbyist, who will advocate for oftentimes lower assessments.
Let's talk about lower assessments, because we know, you know as well as anyone, that over the last, let's say from 2012 backward, we saw property values just plummeting in significant portions of California, even in LA County, not as bad as the Inland Empire. And under what's known as Prop 8, the Prop 8 of the 70s, not the Prop 8 of the 2000s, I guess, these homeowners could seek a lower valuation. Why don't you explain that, sir?
If you let's say you owned a home that you purchased for $500,000, you paid taxes based on $500,000, but because of the recession, it fell to $250,000. We are constitutionally obligated to lower your assessment for property tax purposes so that you're only paying taxes based on the actual value of your home, which has been reduced.
And you don't need to seek that valuation decrease. It's supposed to happen.
We are required to do that, and but you can seek it proactively. You can file an appeal. You can file an administrative review, and we also will do it on our own to ensure that it's done for all.
Now, what's so interesting is, let's say, for argument's sake, that individual saw the valuation drop from $500,000 to $300,000, but now the property values have gone up.
If your property has gone back up to its base year, then your taxes will go back up.
I mean, immediately.
Immediately.
It's not as if there's going to be graduation.
This is the only time under Prop 13 where you could have a big increase. If you bought your home for $500,000, it went down to $250,000, but then popped back up to $500,000, your taxes go right back up to that $500,000 mark.
So that's critical for our viewers to know.
Because people may get a bill that will show that this big increase, and they have probably in the back of their minds this knowledge that your taxes aren't supposed to go up more than 2% a year. It only goes up 2% a year if you exceed the base year. But when you're in that Prop 8 decline in value portion, you could experience a much larger increase in your tax bill.
And we also know that the real estate market is starting to move. We're seeing more purchases of homes in California. I, for example, purchased a home in 2013, and I recently received a notice of supplemental payment due. It wasn't the bill, it was just a notice that a bill would come. Explain what I received.
It's basically a way of reconciling the previous taxes under the old base year with the property taxes under the new base year. When you bought it, if you bought in February, the first January, the value was under the old for the old owner. After February, it's based on the new purchase price which you acquired it for.
And so, is there a prescription of when I will get that second bill, or not necessarily, but it will come?
Well, it will come, and you will be obligated.
Great for me.
You will be obligated to pay it, and it will reconcile the difference between the previous year and the new base year value.
So you mentioned Prop 13. 13, and I
Yes.
want to speak with you about it. Explain exactly how Prop 13 works again for our viewers.
Prop 13 stabilizes the value of property at the point of a transfer. A transfer is, for example, is a sale.
Right.
You buy your property for $500,000. That becomes your base year, and your property taxes are based on $500,000
For the
length of your ownership.
as long as it doesn't go down.
As long as it doesn't go down, and the maximum it can go up any year is 2%.
Okay.
So
Who decides if it will go up 2% or 1%? Is it the state or the county?
it's the county.
And in LA County, have they traditionally increased it 2% every year?
It's generally, except when 2008, when the market fell and property values went down. So generally, it goes upward. And
Yeah, please.
this year, in 2013, property values in LA County went up an average of 4.66%, which is
Okay.
double over 2012. 3 years in a row with increase in property assessments in LA County.
So if property values decrease, the county cannot increase by that 2%?
No, because remember, you're only paying property taxes based on the fair market value of your home, except as otherwise controlled by Proposition 13. So when it goes down and your property is worth less today, you're not
Interesting. I didn't
obligated to pay
realize
more.
that.
You're not supposed to pay more in taxes than your.
There are special assessments on your property tax bill?
Yes, but those usually come from other government agencies. Your
Right.
city may put a special assessment on there for sidewalk repair. You may get something on there from
Right.
the school district for a bond.
So it's a pass-through.
Those are pass-throughs.
And those can add up. I mean, that's aside from the 2%.
They do, but the assessor is not responsible for those.
There you
The
have it,
assessor
right.
just determines the value of your property. Those special assessments are on your property. And the assessor also doesn't send you your property tax bill. We just tell the tax collector how much your home is worth. The tax collector sends you a bill.
So in LA County, it's not unified. In some counties, the assessor and the tax collector are unified. Not in LA County.
Not in LA County. You do not. The assessor does not send you a tax bill. You get your tax bill.
So your name's not on the tax bill if you were
If I
elected?
elected, no. It would be from Mark Saladino, who's the LA County Treasurer and Tax Collector.
Who is not elected?
He's not elected. He's appointed by the Board of Supervisors. And so if
Okay.
you're mad about your tax bill,
Don't
be
go
mad at the assessor.
Exactly.
Right.
Let's go back to Prop 13 if we can. There have been rumblings about whether we need to reform Prop 13. There's not a lot of consensus on any element of Prop 13 reform, but I understand there is maybe one or two areas where both left and right think, okay, here's an example of where we can reform Prop 13.
there are some exceptions where there seems to be consensus at this point. One is called a legal entity transfer, where a property will effectively change ownership through the sale of less than 50% portions of that.
I see.
Of that. So, for example, 3 or 4 people may buy 25% interest in a property from
Right.
4 other people.
Right.
The ownership has changed, but under the rules, it says that the controlling interest has not changed because nobody
Ever
has a
owned
controlling-
25%?
Nobody owned
Oh,
more than
50% plus 1.
And so a piece of property that may be worth double what it was before is still being assessed at the lower level. And I think most agree that that was not the intent of Prop 13. It's really not fair, and it's denying the county and the taxpayers a fair return on those
So
assessments.
if that regulation was to be changed, would it be done at the county level?
No, it would have to be done at the state level, at the legislature.
So should you be elected assessor, you're really not setting tax policy per se. It's not really for you to decide how Prop 13 is interpreted.
The assessor is constitutionally obligated to follow the law and to follow the Constitution, which Prop 13 is a part of. The assessor is subject matter experts, but the policy is really determined by the people and through their elected representatives in the legislature.
And that's the key. I mean,
That is
the
the key.
counties really don't have that much to say about how property taxes are meted out.
Now the Board of Supervisors, which spends property taxes, would probably have a pretty they would probably have a pretty
Right.
big vested interest in having an opinion.
Right.
I think for the assessor really wants to be the subject matter expert who can help the policymakers make the best decisions.
His name is Jeff Prang, member of the West Hollywood City Council, candidate for Los Angeles County Assessor. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
Each percentage point in increased property value generates how much additional revenue for California?
Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Bill Watkins, professor at Cal Lutheran in Thousand Oaks. He is also the executive director of the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting. And I thought we'd look into the crystal ball and try to get a sense of where we are as we approach 2014. In some ways, it feels as if we've turned the corner, but in some communities, it feels as if we're still in the midst of real tough times.
Well, that's exactly right. Both are true. Some places, the Bay Area in particular, San Diego and Orange County are going along pretty nicely right now.
Really?
Other places, Inland Empire, the San Joaquin Valley,
Right.
they're suffering through something that looks a lot like a depression.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a tale of two cities or a tale of two Californias,
Exactly
as you call
right.
it.
Right.
Why?
Because the coastal area attracts a relatively wealthy, well-educated population, and the Central Valley, it's traditionally been agriculture,
Right.
and it's just languishing.
And if we look at communities of color, I think it's fair to say many of those communities, specifically Latino communities, African American communities, they continue to struggle.
Absolutely.
And even in good times, they are disproportionately represented in the unemployment rolls, for example.
Absolutely. And right now, the unemployment rate for college-educated heads of households,
Right.
less than 4%.
Wow.
But for a young black man, probably over 30% today.
And then when you look at, as you call it, inland California, we know San Bernardino County, this main city in that county, is bankrupt, and it has one of the highest poverty rates in the nation.
Second highest only to Detroit.
What's stunning about that is in the mid-'70s, San Bernardino was called an all-American city,
Right.
and yet it's struggling dramatically.
It is, and part of the thing there was they lost the military base, Norton Air Force Base, and
Right.
they marched down the freeway. But there's other parts of San Bernardino County that are doing a little better. But
They have that new Amazon distribution center. One would hope that would bring that community up a bit.
Right.
At the same time, I could use the distribution center as a metaphor for what some would say is California's business climate. Amazon only agreed to bring the distribution center to San Bernardino and one other in Northern California after a mighty compromise was arranged as it related to internet tax. And it begs the question because California is notorious for being business unfriendly.
Sure.
Yes. Is that a fair rap?
in a sense, it is. First, California has a lot of advantages. We're on the Pacific Rim between the Asian
Right.
manufacturers, huge American market, and so we're well positioned. Business will pay a little extra to be here, but I'm afraid that what we're doing is making the cost, and it's not just taxes, it's all the costs, complying with regulation.
And let's make that distinction because I do think it's so critical. It's easy to say we're a high tax, high regulation state.
Sure.
But as I understand it, that may be a bit not accurate. I mean, it really overstates it because what I know, and please, you're the expert, when it comes to taxing, if you really look at all tax increments, any way that we tax, I should say, we come in the middle. It's
on an average basis.
On an average.
Sure.
But on regulation, it's hard to deny that we're a high regulation state.
Well, absolutely, but it's not just that. I call it DIRT: delay, uncertainty, regulation, and taxes. It's the total cost. Causing a project to delay years in some cases, it makes it more expensive.
Right.
You got to finance it longer and all that. Uncertainty means you have to have higher profits for it. Those things are as costly as the regulation and the taxes.
And what's so interesting about the regulation issue is, I speak with Democrats in the legislature, I speak with Republicans in the legislature, and it actually feels as if both sides believe that California has a regulation problem.
Well,
both sides.
I think both sides are ready to make a move on CEQA. The
Right.
governor's been doing it because it was originally set in place to protect our beaches and the forests and all that, and now it's being used as a competitive tool.
Right. But
I
what's
think that,
so frustrating for someone you look at CEQA is to the extent that we have seen CEQA reform over the last 2 or 3 legislative years, it's been for big sports stadiums or big projects.
That's right.
We haven't had that bona fide
Institutional.
that bona fide CEQA reform.
Yeah.
So why is it if you have a Democratic governor
Right.
Who are, if you buy into the stereotype, should be kind of pro-regulation. He wants to reform regulation.
Right.
You got Republicans willing to do it. Why can't we see bona fide regulatory reform?
I think it's because the environmentalists have fought so hard for the regulations that they've gotten that they're just really reluctant to take a step back. And I think most people are like this. You fight for years to get something, and somebody wants to nibble away at it. They're really worried that things could go way bad, way fast.
But do the environmentalists hold a lot of sway? I mean, if you said labor, I would say, oh, okay, yeah. But
I think they do.
Really?
So some natural Senator Rod Wright.
Sure. Democrat from Los Angeles.
Democrat from Los Angeles, Inglewood.
Very pro-regulatory reform.
Absolutely. And so he would be for it, and I think most of the labor would be with it too.
Right.
But you also have places like Santa Barbara.
Right.
Santa Barbara is a very wealthy community. A lot of the people there that make decisions came from someplace else because they like it just exactly the way it is, and they don't want to see any
Well,
changes.
it's that kind of metaphorical limousine liberal.
That's
I mean, very wealthy yet, reticent to engage in anything that will upset their pristine coast and big lots. The flip side, though, is while California may be seen as the poster child for the need for regulatory reform, Texas is seen almost the opposite
wild,
way.
Wild West.
Yeah, it may be very easy to do business, but you also see high lead levels and high, just a lot of stuff going on there. So
California doesn't have to be Texas.
Yeah, and really talk about that, because we so often hear electeds who believe that we are overregulated, using Texas as the example, but yet, high teen birth rate. I mean, just so many issues are going on in Texas.
So there's a couple things. One, people will pay to live here as opposed to, say, Amarillo. And I can speak about this because I actually spent a couple of years in junior high school in Amarillo.
There you have it.
And it's, almost any place in California is better than Amarillo.
One could argue.
And so we actually did a survey a few years back in Santa Barbara of sort of white collar workers, ask them how much they could make more if they lived outside of California. And the smallest answer we got was about 10,000. So people are willing to pay. They're willing to pay more for housing. So on the cost side, that's there. On the flip side is Californians are more productive. Californians,
really,
2% after you. This is Fed study in San Francisco.
Please.
Fed. After you adjust for education, capital, everything, industry composition, 2% more productive. That means businesses can afford to pay a few more taxes or whatever in order to do this.
I want to speak with you briefly about the national economy. As we speak, we know recently the federal government somehow managed to get through their crisis, but there's no doubt that the rumblings of it are still being felt. We know that the issue will surely be revisited in January and February. What is the impact of the dysfunction of Washington, D.C. on the economy?
Well, it's the uncertainty. It's delay, uncertainty.
It's the dirt,
right?
yeah, it's the dirt, right. There you have it.
And businesses are just reluctant to invest in the presence of uncertainty. And what's happened over the past few years, because Republicans blame the Democrats and vice versa, but it doesn't matter. It's a very uncertain environment. Nobody knows what's going to come out. We go crisis to crisis. The world's going to end, and then all of a sudden a deal signed.
But do you, as someone who's forecasting, do you think that Washington is going to get it, that the public is done with building an economy from crisis to crisis?
Not obvious to me that they're going to. I don't see anything there. It appears to work for them electorally. Some of the politicians that have been involved in this are raising big money as a result of it, and that's
but
what.
Is it damaging to our economy?
Absolutely. Uncertainty slows down.
I mean, quantifiable, tangible damage.
One of the primary characteristics of this recovery, besides the fact that it's slow, has been very low investment, and
that's because of dirt.
Part of it is because of regulation and uncertainty.
His name is Bill Watkins. He's a professor at California Lutheran University. My name is Brad Pomerance. You've been watching Charter California Edition.